Very good.
So welcome everyone. We have a little music in the background. Is there any way that could be either lowered to just a verbal or turned off? Thank you so much. So that's okay. Thank you, Jackson. Welcome everyone to this celebration of the debut novel in stories by our own Lucian Childs. So my name is Lee Parpart, and Lucian and I met in 2018 through Canadian authors. We were founding members of a group called the Annex Writing Group, and he's kind of come and gone. He had some very good reasons for leaving us, and you know, the worst terrible reasons, but then
You're the worst crit I'd ever gotten. But I love everybody.
Sure. She says that with that southern,
Yeah.
like, you know the southern Gothic, and you know how they like mesmerize you with their vowels, right? And they just draw you in, and then they whack you. Exactly. Yeah, it's same in Ireland. You can't take the surface level of the utterance, you know, you can't. But I don't have to tell you, this room full of Lucian's friends, just how marvelous this person is. But I just want to say that through, you know, having the great privilege of reading some early drafts of section 2 of the book, and how many people already have it or have had a chance to dip into it or even read it. Oh my goodness, like half the room. And the rest of you, we'll try not to spoil you too much, but you'll have to navigate that. So having the privilege of reading his early drafts of that work, and then hearing him talk about, you know, like currents within MFA programs where young writers were exploring different types of points of view within writing, including this collective we that guides the second chapter, really opened my eyes to the fact that this is a prose stylist and a serious writer, a serious student of writing of experimental forms. And you know, if you have dipped into the book or finished it, you know that it's not even like a novel. It's not even a collection of short stories. I mean, Lucian came up with the best term for it, I think, right? Novel in stories. So it's like 5 short novellas or 6 short novellas or 6 very long short stories that almost function like soundings. I was thinking about, you know, as I was reading this dazzling, beautiful book, I was thinking about metaphors, as I do, right? I write poetry, so I'm always thinking about metaphors for how to understand the structure of this remarkable book. And it's like sounding when they take a topographical map at the bottom of the ocean and they send down, they get pictures of they use sound to get pictures of the bottom, and then they piece it together. This is what we as readers are required to do in engaging with this experimental, beautiful book. So it's just a pleasure. It's just a pleasure to be here. And I was thinking the other thing about it is that the book usefully continues the work that has been begun already of fracturing can-lit. This is not even can-lit, this is can-am, or this is like a fabulous gay southern northern Gothic can-am lit, Canadian American lit. It's set in America. It doesn't even make a pretense of having a Canadian connection. And we have another author right there, Ed Seward, whose book Fair that came out with Porcupine's Quill a few years, how many years ago? 3?
Sure.
3, sure. Sure. 4, I don't know. That is another example. So we are no longer tied to these notions that arose in Canadian cultural nationalism in the 70s. It must be a Canadian writer about a Canadian landscape, about a Canadian set of characters.
She's an American.
Canada. American has been here for almost 40 years. But so we're opening, we're broadening it up. And Lucian is part of that. It's a fascinating entry into that new world of, you get a great publisher, Biblioasis, based in Windsor. You get a great Canadian boutique publisher, totally subsidized by the state, picking up a book like this that has the guts to do something different. Stylistically, in terms of genre, in terms of themes and subject matter. And yeah, I just could not be prouder. So to be able to introduce this author in this book. So I've already gone on too long, and I just want to tell you about the structure. Lucian was so kind. He invited me to read a couple of poems, and it just happens that, yes, I'm American, and I'm of an age where I was raised by a doctor who was, sent to Vietnam and came back broken. And I've got a story, and, we've got our traumas, right? And trauma is a major theme within the book, and we're going to be talking about that. So Lucian was generous enough to say, well, why don't you weave a couple of poems in around his readings, which will be the bulk of the event. Three soundings from different parts of the book. And so I think you're going to take it away, right?
Okay. Do you want to do land acknowledgement?
I do. I had a whole thing where I said, it flowed so nicely and I forgot it. But it said, we talked about the fact that he went on a journey. Lucian was, born in Texas and went to Alaska, and he's already writing at this point, even though he's a graphic designer, and, he's got a whole other career plan for himself. And then he winds up in Toronto. And so this book has been all over the place. It has all these different geographical and generic origin stories. And then, but in that, I don't want us to forget that it was also produced on this land, that has not belonged to most of the people in this group, that it is Treaty 13 land. It is the traditional territories of the Wendat, the Huron, the Mississaugas of the Credit, and the Anishinaabe. And we remember, in order to do better and to continue to strive to be caretakers of the land and of each other, right? And I think this book is about caretaking for each other. So I'll just let Lucian take it away.
I'll make one other acknowledgement. Yesterday because I'm with friends here. Yesterday was the 4th anniversary of the passing of my husband, Alex Turner. And the last chapter in this book especially could not have been written without that. I was writing it, while I was going through the experience of grieving him, and it's all on the page. So even though without the debauchery in Fort Lauderdale, I didn't do that because it was during COVID. So. Anyway, so I thought I'd start with the first chapter in the book. Let's get to the heart of the matter. We're going to be talking a little bit about trauma, how you can use trauma in narrative fiction so that it's not sentimental, it's not maudlin, people aren't cardboard cutout characters, So we're going to go right to the, as we say in the writing world, the inciting incident, where the shit hit the fan for the first time. So we're in 1977, we're in Killeen, Texas. Rachel is the sister, so beautifully in this cover, is 12. Kyle, the central character, is 15. They're living with their mother and father on Fort Hood in base housing. And Rachel, whose point of view this is, and her best friend Ty have just caught Kyle, her brother, sketching naked men in his sketchbook. He's using a Playgirl magazine as his source material. And Rachel is daddy's girl. The father is a traumatized Vietnam War vet who found religion in the POW camps. And she feels that she must tell him what happened. And it's written in a foreign language. The language is called Texan. So good luck. I hope you understand it. Okay. I trudged up the block, psyching myself up and getting all holier than now. I pinched that magazine by a corner, afraid to get contaminated by whatever my brother got on it. The sun had dipped behind the cottonwoods, casting long shadows across the street. In the trees, the cicadas were sawing away, and the mockingbird mimicked a hawk's call, like it was shrieking a warning. Dad was waiting at the front door. I lifted up that magazine, the centerfold tumbling back out, and I told him. On Dad's face, a pained look broke out into a sneer and then into a full-blown Halloween monster mask. He stormed through the house, but my brother wasn't there, not in the backyard either. His bike had disappeared. My father scrambled back into his truck and squealed off. As Mom and I were finishing supper, he came back empty-handed and told her she better call the cops. Around midnight, red and blue lights were spinning out front, and a good old boy whose belly hung over his belt was at the door with Kyle in handcuffs. Just to scare some sense into him, Dad told me later. The cop picked up my brother at a rest stop on I-35 trying to hitch a ride south. When the officer asked Kyle where the heck he was running to, all Kyle said was, away. After the cop sped off, Dad yanked Kyle by his long hair into the living room and started wailing on him. Not with a belt, like usual, but his fists. I couldn't stand it and ran out. Ever since I was 7, I practically lived at Ty's place, so my feet found their way over there. Ty was at her bedroom window, looking over at our house. She had her arms wrapped tight around her, and it seemed like maybe she was shaking. We stood side by side, not close enough to touch, but connected by what we'd done, by each cry coming through the window, by the sound of each whack of the fist. And though I pushed them out of my head, the images kept coming back, what our fathers must have done to people during the war. It was real quiet in our house by the time I dared go over there. In the back, my parents were huddled in the dark around a patio table, Mom crying in her hands, Dad staring off, looking even more spaced out than usual. On the table between them, a stack of black books, Kyle's sketchbooks, probably full of drawings of naked men. When I slunk back to my room, Kyle's door was cracked open. I could just make him out in the nightlight, on his back in bed, that light blonde hair making him seem like an old man. A bruise smudged his cheek, and there was the start, too, of a real bad black eye. It was so weird, him lying there, still as stone, staring at the ceiling without even blinking. All his drawings on the wall gawking down at him like people looking in an open casket at a funeral. I slouched back to my room, threw myself in bed, and buried my head in the pillow like those big, stupid birds do in the cartoons, trying to make everything go away. But my mind kept seeing stuff. What was left of us wearing black, riding in the back of a limo and single filing it to the cemetery with a bunch of other cars behind. Mom was sniffling into her handkerchief. Beside her, me and Dad, transformed. Me snugged in his arms, now his prim, darling, and only child. Him, the fun dad again. The one I saw laughing in pictures taken in Korea before I got born and he was sent off to fight in Vietnam. My brother's bloody face floated up too, and the words printed in my Bible under the picture of a weeping man. Listen, your brother's blood cries out to me, and so cursed you shall be.
What are we doing? Am I reading my phone? All right. Okay. So, as I mentioned, my dad was conscripted, and after marching on Washington Mall against the Vietnam War, he was conscripted and torn away from his family. He had 2 kids already, and in his 30s, sent to Long Bin, 93rd Evac Hospital, where he was the only neurologist and saw way too much and couldn't save people because it was all head injuries, and came back as broken as you can be. Barely kept his career together. So, and was at times, at least, like seemed to have the potential for violence. I never actually saw it, but my mother saw more than I did. So this is called Becoming Water, and Lucian helped me retitle it because he listened to a voicemail message I sent to him about it. And he called it Moving to Escape Him, and I kind of like that. We went on the move at a certain point in my teens, and so this is a description of those events. It's the longest poem I've ever read. It's 2 pages. Sorry about that. It's a bit long. For 10 years after the Tet offensive spit our father into a locked ward, the rest of us moved so often we became movement, became the rivers roping through each new address. The Charles, the Merrimack, the Zambezi, the Animus crowned us liquid citizens of the anywhere he wasn't. Movement itself, carving tributaries through our fleeing bodies. We were ships losing ourselves, escapees spiraling away from the man who'd left his mind under a palm tree in Long Bin. To our father, we must have looked like deserters, pole sticking to safety through the high reeds. Come here, he said, but we could no longer hear his voice. Stay and help sounded like whale song, gunfire, the clatter of egrets on a rocky shore. When I think of him, gurney prone, wife and daughters gone, I'm ashamed, even as I recall his crimes. Either way, we left, packed our van, and headed west. On moonlit nights in Durango, we lay on our backs in the tall grasses next to the Animus, miles north of the San Juan. We studied the stars and imagined half-siblings thousands of miles east. A young man or woman, paler, taller than their friends, bent over fields or managing a staff at the Ho Chi Minh Four Seasons. If he did leave offspring, we hoped they inherited his good looks, his high IQ, while dodging his wild inner pendulum. All of his brilliance without the bipolar could be a good life, even fatherless, even in a war zone. While flowing to and from our own fall of Saigon, we suppressed the events that pushed us west, hushed talk of rotary phones ripped from plaster, of jars hitting walls, the circling of blue lights, kitchen doors off hinges, neighbors on their stoops, still in housecoats, staring, all disappeared down a well of forgetting. While becoming water, we even erased our mother's egg yolk maneuver, the way she grabbed the mayonnaise and made it fly, the crunch of glass and Hellmann's on silent plaster. If you've ever tried to whitewater raft down a river of mayonnaise and glass, you know all about the rocks just below the surface. You've sensed the watery amnesia that stains the minds of those sent over cataracts without a rubber boat, seen how the paddle slows mid-stroke, how the sun turns a flowing run of rapids into a rancid yellow mess. And then you are with me, and I am with you. If we meet at a party, hovering over a punch bowl in a happy house filled with happy people, generously pretending we fit in, we'll know each other by sight or scent. We'll know the low hum of a decades-old terror hanging like stinging mists from a straight plunge. We'll know we were formed in those same waters. We'll have no choice but to turn and walk away or clutch, befriend, and talk for days.
One of the things I think that poems share with short stories that they're both a compressed form, and so obviously short story has as much material as a novel does, compressed in a short space, and then again, poetry is even pressed even more. So everything I'm saying in this book was just in that, at least a big part of it was in that short poem. So I'm always amazed at poets for what they can do. So each section of this book is told from a different point of view, which does give the work a bit of an experimental flavor. So I thought I'd read from the point of view of Diane, Kyle's mother. So now we're fast forwarding. We're in San Francisco. It's now May 1997. So that's 20 years later, right? 77 to 97, right? It's in May, which is usually a very warm and sunny month in San Francisco. Kyle's mother, Diane, has lived in the city for 6 years now, and she has a fabulous life. She's gone from being this sort of dowdy army wife to this fabulous person. And she's now living with Kyle and his new lover, his husband, Jason. When this idyll is suddenly disrupted when Diane runs into Rachel at the gay Safeway on Market Street. And then this happens. It's only 11:30, but after coming across Rachel, Diane needs a cocktail. Not at home. The boys will be off to the gym by now. She doesn't want to drink alone. Diane abandons the shopping cart in the middle of the aisle, ditches the car in the lot, and storms up Market Street. Ahead, the last of the ropey coils of fog is receding over the top of Twin Peaks. Too soon, she thinks, this fog. Outside the bar, at the corner of Market Street in Castro, she plucks her flip phone from her purse. When she reaches Kyle, he and Jason are already on the bus. She calls a confab. No, she can't discuss it on the phone. Call Bethy and Bafo or whoever they were meeting for lunch and cancel. Mandatory attendance now. She ambles through the open door into the bar. On her first visit to the city, the summer a year after Kyle made his getaway from Texas, while her son was bussing tables, she often came here. She never expected something so cozy in the Castro, a place known for its packed restaurants and murky cruise bars. But the bank of windows let in a barrage of light onto the upholstered couches, antiques, a big mirrored bar. For a change, then, she found herself surrounded by people her own age, nice men, nice clothes and haircuts, a little lonely perhaps behind all their boisterousness. They smiled at her and winked, brought her drinks and asked if she needed help. They thought she was a tourist who had wandered in mistakenly, which on that first trip she basically was. To escape Colleen on that and every visit after to the city, she spun a tale she'd worked out with her friend Myrtle. The two of them had traveled to Galveston on one of their semi-regular girls' trips to hit the beach and the spa. Though in the end, her husband had been too uninterested to question the ruse, on that first trip she was terrified he wouldn't buy it. She feared also in what condition she might find her son. But Kyle greeted her at the door of his apartment, freshly showered and shaved, looking happy in the new clothes she had sent. So excited about everything, Kyle practically leapt out of his skin. He was still only a boy, her boy, who needed looking after more than ever. To keep tabs on him, Diane traveled to the city on 3 more occasions. On each of those visits, when Kyle was otherwise engaged, she wound her way down here to this bar. She'd enter, a hand would fly up. Someone would bumble over in his couch and pat the spot next to him. Darling, he'd say. He and his friends would kiss her on the cheek and joke around, happy to be settled in their comfy seats by the windows while the river of people flowed by outside. Today, At this early hour, the room is only half occupied, and she notices nobody that she knows. She orders a Tom Collins and proceeds to her favorite couch under the balcony. Its red velvet and gold leaf brightly lit in the noonday sun. After a few moments, the boys troop in, each with a petite gym bag dangling from one hand. They grab Bloody Marys at the bar and join her on the couch. Jesus, Mom, Jason says, what's the emergency? Red alert, boys, the demon spawn has blown into town. The what? Kyle says. I ran into your sister at the supermarket. What the fuck? Kyle says. Exactly, Diane says. Jason slurps the red liquid noisily through a straw. Well, that's great news, isn't it? I'm excited to meet her finally. Have you forgotten the mess she caused? Diane says. You weren't there. You take it so lightly. No, I don't. It's just, it was so long ago, Jason says. You can't still hold that against her, can you, Mom? Diane swirls the last of her drink, downs it quickly. You know, dear, sometimes when you call me that, it feels like you're, what's the expression? Like you're playing me. Immediately, she is sorry for having said this, for how these hurtful feelings come so easily from her mouth. I haven't spoken to Rachel in 15 years, Kyle says. What would I say to her? Oh, thank you very much for fucking up my entire life. Well, you can't just ignore her, Jason says. Come on, this is a good thing, Rachel coming here. It's a chance, heal the rift and everything. Is that even possible, Kyle says? Of course, Jason raises his glass. People, let's heal the motherfucking rift.
Jason pays for his optimism. So last poem, I almost feel like, I want to redeem that first one because although it's dear to me, it is so bloody long for a poem. This one is about a mother, not quite a Diane, but a piece of work nonetheless, and happens to be a real mother I know very well. This poem is part of my attempt to stop complaining and move on to other modes of relating to my mother. So it's called Back in 5 Minutes, and it usually makes me cry. So I apologize. I will try to get through it. Back in 5 minutes, like on a store sign. Mother collects jangle shells and dried hydrangeas. She tends to them all winter, a coyote guarding her piles of bones. I guess you could say she loves dead things that are beautiful. I've tried to be a dead thing, beautiful in the palm of her hand, but these prostrations always end with me sticking a lollipop on someone's sweater or swallowing a mouthful of sand. A good poet once told me that his poem stopped sucking when he quit casting himself as the sad boy on a candy-coated planet. Too long have I filtered the world like a bivalve, spinning its own shell from the fibers of its fleshy self. I want to take the closed sign that's hanging in my heart and flip it around. I want to hear the jingle of the door as she walks in, her coat darkened with rain. You can read the next one, right?
Okay. Okay, so go to the last chapter, which is from poor Jason, his point of view. He's such a nice guy, but he doesn't get a lot of credit for it. We have now fast forwarded to 2015. I'm not going to do the math, but it's October. A lot of these stories are set in October or May, and we're in Fort Lauderdale. Kyle has abandoned both his mother and Jason. He is now living with his best friend in San Juan, Puerto Rico, making a new life for himself. Jason goes to visit Rachel. And Rachel's probably around 50, Jason's in his mid-30s. The heat, still brutal here at the beginning of October, radiates through tinted windows into the air-conditioned interior of Jason's rental. He navigates the SUV through Fort Lauderdale's twisty residential streets. Seagulls wheel and churn against a sky dotted with fair weather clouds. He crosses a bridge onto one of the narrow man-made islands that make up the neighborhood of Lauderdale Harbors. Ahead, the blacktop threads between tall foxtail palms, each crowned with a riotous green bouquet. When he first emailed Rachel proposing a visit, Jason was met with silence. All spring, he peppered Rachel with requests. In June came her typical sarcastic reply, "Why bother?" In July, she wrote, "Up to my eyeballs here. Is there something you want?" He wasn't sure. It was only that he feels weirdly related to Rachel, if not by blood, then by sorrow. He wrote back, "Come on, it'll be fun." More like ripping off a bandage after the wound has healed. Painful, but necessary. Jason punches the brake when he reaches his destination. 2 large palm trunks protrude from the gravel in front of a small circular drive. Beyond that, a modest cream-colored one-story stucco house. Jason steps outside. Instantly, sweat seeps from his pores. Humidity binds his knit shirt to his skin. As he crosses the drive, his running shoes stick to snaky black asphalt patches. His finger trembles as it reaches for the doorbell. A dog barks, a rustling in the house. The door opens the length of a chain. "Yeah?" The voice is deep, raspy, not what he expected, wariness in the rise of its inflection. "Rachel?" "Yes?" It's Jason Stewart. The chain clatters out of its channel. The door creaks. From the opening, a black and tan terrier barks at him, dancing excitedly, the little claws tapping the stone tiles in the entryway. "Nippy, no," Rachel shouts, bending down to wag one commanding finger at the little dog. It whimpers and shifts onto its haunches. "Jason, oh, wow, it's you. Sorry, I wasn't expecting you until next week." He barely recognizes her because of her bulk that balloons the dirty lime green sweats. She emits an odor of cigarettes and mouthwash. Long, limp hair clings to her pale face. "It's the 6th, Jason said, like we planned." "What? Oh shit, I wrote it down as the 16th. I'm such a dunce. I can come back later." No, come in." When she leads him into the corridor, the dog begins a sequence of sharp, flat yaps, each one like a nail driven into his skull. Rachel scoops up the terrier and tosses it onto an unmade bed in the adjoining room and slams the door shut. On the coffee table in the living room, beer cans and half-empty wine glasses have corralled a plate of desiccated appetizers. Ashtrays brim with cigarette butts. "Sorry the place is such a wreck. And me, I'm just getting up. Last night I had my book group over. Wait here half a sec, will you?" She pads at her bare feet into the bedroom. Unsure what to do, Jason remains standing in the corner in the center of the room. Above the sofa, a faded American flag crinkles behind glass in a metal frame. And another, set on the mantle above the fireplace's dusty ceramic logs, is a photo of a soldier with a thick mustache. Army, enlisted man in dress blues, his cap canted rakishly across his forehead. Jason steps to the mantle to examine the angular jawline, so familiar too, the deep-set eyes. Next to the portrait, a medal dangles from a clear plastic frame. "Dad won't have that at the old folks' home." Jason jumps, startled by the brassy voice behind him. Standing in the opening to the hall, Rachel exhales, cigarette smoke from taut lips. Her hair is pulled in a ponytail. She wears loose khaki shorts, a collared shirt whose bright pink clashes with her lipstick. The Purple Heart, that is, she says. Dad thinks somebody at the home where he lives will steal it. Personally, I think he doesn't want to be reminded of who he used to be. Jason scrutinizes again the photo of the father. He searches for the monster Kyle described, but all Jason can see is their resemblance, not just in the structure of the face, but in the sadness of the eyes, the fatigue suggested by the drooping lids, the crow's feet furrowing the flesh. Pretty startling how much they look alike, don't you think? Rachel says. How old was he then? Rachel crosses the room and, cigarette dangling from her lips, lifts the photo off the mantel and examines the back. 1992, must have been taken right after my mother quit him. He'd be, what, 48? Kyle's age now. She winces, with two fingertips, massages tiny circles into the skin at her temple. How about a cocktail? Serious? Deadly. I need a drink, a little hair of the dog. Plus, if we're going to get into all this stuff about Kyle, both of us could probably use one.
Oh my goodness. All right.
Now we're going to talk a little bit.
Yep, we're gonna get into it. And then there's, and depending on how we do and how things are flowing, we can take questions whenever. But and I have a couple of questions for you that have been actually, actual questions for me that is it fair to even get into whether there's any sort of autobiographical element? That's the worst question every author reads it. You don't want to hear it. It's not fair. It's not nice. But right off the bat,
I think I would say that every writer kind of like he sins is like a prism. You shine the light through it. It's a white light. You shine the light through it, and it comes out rainbow colored on the other side. I always think you shine your personal life through the lens, which is the story. And it gets refracted through the story, and then it comes out in this pattern. So it's not your story, but there is a lot of you in it. Some reviewers have thought it was from a personal experience, but I give the second chapter away. People haven't read it. It's at a conversion therapy facility, and I have never been to a conversion therapy.
It's good. I'm very glad to hear that you were not subjected to that. That would have been a level of trauma that might even make it hard to, collect yourself enough in life to write a book. Because trauma can interrupt lives.
And Boy Erased is a very good book that I used as one of my source materials he went through a program called Love in Action, and he wrote a wonderful book, and which was turned into a movie, and so I recommend that one.
Mm-hmm. So we promised to talk about trauma. Trauma does, lace its way through this book. I mean, it's such a complex portrait of the way trauma, where it comes from, how it affects the immediate, the victim of the traumatic incident, what the context for this kind of social political context for, the father's behavior, and then how that transmits to the son, and then this fracturing out. Speaking of prisms, right? It prismatically goes out into the world and touches everyone, from their mother to the daughter who was the guilty party. Come to understand how she even managed to make this terrible mistake in the first place. We think we understand it, and then it affects two of Kyle's lovers, and so it affects all aspects of his life. And then there's this article that Lucian sent to me. It was a New Yorker piece. I don't know who saw it or if anyone saw it, but criticizing the use of trauma in too many narratives, saying that it's become this formula, this reflexive thing that, if you have a TV show, whether, Ted Lasso or Fleabag, or you write a novel, or you bring back an older novel, like you know, there've been renovelizations of some of James's works, and they've added things like, you know, personal histories of rape. In every case, there has to be this trauma, right? And it becomes this reflex. So my question is like, how did you work with the material without falling into that trap that writer describes of having it be just another trauma, you know?
Well, I hadn't actually read that article before I did it, but I think your criticism was that it sort of flattens the character. One is a cheap emotional trick to get the reader to identify with the character. But two, it sort of flattens the character. So the characters become merely a symptom set, or they become cardboard cutout villains or wannabe saviors. And so I really did not want it to be like, you know, 200 pages of Kyle cutting himself and trying to commit suicide. I just didn't think that would be a very interesting book. So the gambit that I thought would be more interesting would be to you know, Kyle is at the center of everything, but the stories are, as she says, of these other people. So they sort of revolve around him, but we see Kyle's traumatized behavior. We see him looking up at the ceiling, kind of zoned out in a fugue, and but it's not just kind of, there is a kind of repetitiveness to PTSD, a repetitiveness to trauma. In my own personal experience, you can't really ever escape it. You have to come to it. So it has kind of a cyclical nature, which is kind of boring, you know, when it comes to fiction, and we don't want to bore our readers. So that was kind of the main gambit, and I really wanted it. They're billing it as a coming out story. But I really wanted it to be a story about family, and because family relationships really interest me. And does that answer your question?
Yeah, it does. I mean, I think there are other things things that I noticed, like there's, you know, you're very subtle in dealing, for example, with Kyle's, you know, what we could call his symptomology, right? There were times when I thought, you know, because I read a lot of core answers and, you know, get filled with psychological terminology. I started thinking, is he borderline? He has this fear of abandonment that comes through in the section on Robert, in Robert's story. You know, things like, but it's laced in subtly. Like you really don't hit us over the head. Of course, you can't. It's important that you not do that. But I found that it was super subtle in a way that only if you know these things, you begin to pick up, like the mention of, you know, if anyone is late for Kyle, it gets upset, and also he's the one who insists on monogamy, which sort of turns into an asexual monogamy in the marriage, in the relationship, and is threatened by even the mention of past lovers, right? So the fear of abandonment. So I guess I'm wondering, you know, do you, in the writing and in the revising, and I know you worked with Carolyn Adderson and some other capable
John
people.
Mecca.
Oh gosh, yeah. Some very capable people. Was there a lot of push and pull with, okay, we've gone too far now, we've pulled back, how did that go?
Yeah, curiously, no. I mean, so Carolyn this book has kind of an interesting genesis, because I had come to Carolyn and asked her to help me. I don't have an MFA, so I've had done a lot of workshops and conferences and stuff, but I felt I needed to tighten these stories up that I had already published. And she suggested I link them. And I said, what, are you crazy? You know, I mean, they were written over a 12, 13 year, you know, period of time. But the more I thought about it, the more I thought, you know, really there is an implied narrative arc, especially in this group of stories. But then it was just a process working with them of fleshing it out, so it would, especially when John got a hold of it, he wanted to be more novelistic, so that to me it reads like a novel, but just each chapter is its own story. So but in terms of, you know, I mean, there is definitely the possibility here of going too far. I mean, whenever you write something that basically has sentiment at the core, you can. I think this book just goes up to the edge of melodrama, you know, but I don't think it doesn't quite go over the cliff, you know, and but I'm interested in sentiment, you know. When I read for feeling, you know, I want to cry when I read that poem, and I still cry when I read these stories, amazingly, after reading them for thousands of times, and so
I'm glad to hear that. I'm not the only one. I actually get really embarrassed reading my own poems and crying, but you cry at your own stories. Good.
So to answer your question, no, they never tried to pull me back. They tried to make me expand it and expand these stories and make them be more linked and then more novelistic.
And that happened, I guess. You were able to adapt them. Were they about totally different characters? And then
it was an interesting process because the existing stories were more or less had the shape that the ones in the book have now, but we kind of stripped them to the bone and wrote kind of new stories on top of that architecture. And so originally there was a story about a girl who was kind of out of control, like Rachel is, and she does something, you know, that betrays her brother. And so just each one of those existing stories had the potential to recraft them in a way that makes this overarching narrative. I got lucky.
You got lucky.
Yeah.
And especially dealing with, you know, John Metcalf. Oh my gosh.
He has a reputation for being extremely tough, not always very nice, but he was a complete gentleman to me.
Yeah.
Okay.
So part of the journey for one of the characters in particular is, you know, it's a story of partial, complicated redemption for Rachel. I guess that's how I would try to put it. And she's such an interesting character. I just want to hear you talk about that balance between outlining her complicity. You know, she's guilty, but really, when I went back to read the beginning of the book again, when I started reading it for a second time, I saw all the places where we're trying to work to create an understanding or a place for us to feel some compassion for her. And because, you know, maybe her dad would love her. Maybe she'd get another prize at the church like she did for memorizing Corinthians, you know. She's pleasing, she's trying to please, and when she does this unspeakable thing. Right. So how do you?
And she's also swept. I mean, I wish I could read aloud the chapter, what happens before, because her friend Diana is just this very wonderful and comedic character, and she basically kind of eggs Rachel on to do this thing, and Rachel, because of Diana's urgings and all these things that you said, she kind of gets into a situation that she didn't know, you know, really, she didn't think about what was the ramifications of her actions, and then she had to live with them for all those years. And I do think, and I'd be interested to hear from people who've read it, because I know a lot of people here have. I do think at the end there's a kind of a recomposition of the family. I don't want to give the ending away, but I just feel like, you know, there's a Jason and that little dog and Rachel. I don't know. They just there's some recomposition of the family, I think, there, without spelling it out, you know.
Yeah, and it wasn't the ending that I expected, and now I'm treading on really, like, this is, I don't want to
no spoilers.
Yeah, but no spoilers.
Many people have read it. So.
Okay, all right. I'm just not even gonna go there. I don't know. I feel like there might be some questions in the room. I can't quite feel people leaning forward, ready to raise their hands. But are there anyone who's read the book or hasn't and has a question anyway, based on what you've
And I'd be interested to see what you guys think of it. Deb?
Yeah, I was wondering if you considered writing the father's story, and if not, why not? Or
Yeah, I kind of feel like it was a mistake not to now. I think it's just for personal reasons. I'm really kind of like Kyle. I didn't have much of a relationship with my dad, and the fathers always get short shrift in my work, and they're kind of ciphers because they were dads of that age were kind of ciphers. They went off to work and they worked long hours. They come back tired and exhausted. They sit in front of the TV, have a beer. They call them the lost generation, because they really kind of weren't part of their family. They thought of themselves as a breadwinner and only that. And he's definitely in there. He's very much in there, but only, in the background. And same thing with the grandparents are also very much in there as well. And if I ever get to the third book, we're going to hear a lot from them, because Elaine and CK are very much a kick in the pants. And so I've kind of resolved to do better. In the next book, I'm going to write a chapter about the dad. So I kind of feel it was a mistake, but you can't go back and change it now.
We're so guided by our own experience.
John?
As a writer, how do you decide how much to reveal of a character at any one point? Because I noticed as you went through the story, all of a sudden you're presented with a bit of information and it immediately makes you think back on what you've written. Oh, that's what's going on.
Right.
That was the thing. How do you decide to, because I presume as you write, you have a pretty good picture in your head of what this character is about, but it may not be advantageous to reveal it all at one time.
Right. I think, they call that, when you go to writing classes, they call that rate of reveal. And it's just a lot of trial and error, a lot of writing stuff, throwing it out. I write by hand, right, with a fountain pen, and so I might cut that whole section out, right, and then I'll paste it over someplace later, and so and then some information you don't really get until later stories, and then you have to kind of, that's where Lee's talking about how the reader has to kind of be an active agent in creating the work, because you have to kind of, oh, that's what they were talking about in story 2. So I wish I could say, hey, I just know, from the exactly what I should do. But mostly, I think it's trial and error.
Lucian, when you say that these started as separate short stories and you were encouraged to make them into a novel, how separate were they? Were they relationships? Like, was this the lover of the person I wrote in story, so the previous story? So you actually had to invent the relationships. That's fascinating.
But they kind of, like I said, first, when she suggested, I have this arc that I go through. Somebody gives a criticism or makes a real deep level structural suggestion like that, I go, no. And then I go, maybe. And then I go, yeah. And after I thought about it a while, these stories that were, the shape was there. I mean, there was a character like Robert, you meet in chapter 4, I guess, and he was the head of an AIDS organization, and but it didn't, and it sort of ended with a betrayal, like it does in the book, So it kind of, it really, I lucked out because I had these stories that the bones of them worked for this narrative arc. I just needed to flesh it out with these new characters and these new relationships. I'm a little bit worried with the next set of 6 stories might not work quite as well.
I'm just imagining how exciting that must have been when you introducing strangers and then they turn out to be long lost siblings or something.
Yeah, I mean, it was amazing to think, oh, this kind of asshole guy who was the head of the AIDS organization in this story that was published a long time ago he could be the asshole guy that's the lover of Kyle, who runs an AIDS organization, and then you get then what happens if Diane comes, and he's trying to get rid of her.
a bit of a chess game, yeah. And
I just want to explore that a bit more because I'm fascinated by that whole process. I mean, your initial pushback is what I understand completely. But the fact that these are such old stories, at some point, did it become for you exciting because it was like writing something new rather than trying to get a publisher to publish stories that you wanted published in a book form for quite some time? You were suddenly tasked with writing something in a lot of ways new. So did that, when you got there, did that invigorate you and it became, this is in some way brand new writing?
Yeah, yeah, in a lot of ways it is. I mean, I don't necessarily recommend this as the way if you're gonna write a book to do it this way, but you know, I just basically, you know, I want to get better. You know, this is a very hard thing that we do, and I just want to get better. And so I reached out to Carolyn Adderson when COVID came out. She was going to be my teacher at Banff for 5 weeks, and I said, "Would you work with me?" And so whatever Carolyn suggested that I do, I did it. And then when John got a hold of it, same thing. Whatever he suggested. I mean, if people like that suggest that you do something, it behooves you to do it. These are people who have been thinking about fiction deeply for, in John Metcalf's case, like 60 years. I mean, he's in his mid-80s now. And so it was, you know, it was exciting. It was also amazing because, I mean, how can you work on the same material that long, you know? I mean, so long. And it just, you know, writing really, anything, gardening, visual art, it really requires a level of obsession, I think. You just, you know, can't let it go, and it helps that when you read it, you keep finding things about it, and it, you know, and you keep crying. You know, it keeps affecting you, and it keeps being alive. And did that answer your question?
yeah, I think we're dealing with that. Like, how much do you love your project? Right, and that's always a question, and it comes and goes like a long marriage, you know, like the waxing and waning of passion. Oops, did I say that?
Yeah.
Oh, writing is way more important.
Your husband is right there.
Yeah. And you better be in love with your project, right?
And your
see it
characters.
through. Well, you know, you got people pushing you as well. But okay, I seem to recall you saying at some point when you were making this decision to go with their recommendations, I don't know if this is right or wrong, but I felt like you were saying that it was kind of communicated to you that a collection of very diverse short stories is just not as saleable. So here we're talking about like the nuts and bolts of publishing and also fashion within publishing. What, is that right? Did you tell me that was ever,
Well,
you know, you ever heard that
no,
message? You needed
because the
something like that.
Biblioasis doesn't really care. You know, they're all about art. And so the commercial potential of a project is really not important for Biblioasis, like it would be for, you know, a big house, or even maybe House of Anansi, which is kind of a mid-sized publisher. John, it evolved. John has this thing for the novella. He thinks a novella is a great form that is underappreciated. And so he initially wanted to publish it as a standalone novella. But when the word count got up to like 45,000 words, it's like pushing up against the novel, right? And then I think that's when the marketing peeps, you know, kicked in, and they said, you know, it would be much better for us if we you know, packaged it as a real book, you know, and they did take off. It used to say Dreaming Home, a novel, and they did take that off because they couldn't quite figure out what to call it. You know, was it a novel? Was it a novella? Was it a linked short story collection? Was it I call it a novel of stories, but they're not. They're just calling it Dreaming Home.
It's a mini series.
That's right. Did anyone else notice Lucian's highly inventive and never ever lazy use of verbs? Did anyone? I
Well,
just
that-
kept writing verb, always inventive verbs.
Well, that's another, I actually had already copped to this myself, but Carolyn reinforced it. She has this process which she calls finishing after it's set, you know. You go through and you highlight all the verbs. And then, you know, because you'll find that there's a lot of words. He looked. Look doesn't do any work, right? It doesn't tell you how he's feeling, you know, what he thinks. It should be he glowered, or he glared, or he grimaced, or he, you know, I don't know what, you know, you need to, so I have like lists of verbs, and I just go through each verb, you know, I go through and see if I can find a verb that's more muscular. I mean, sometimes they just need to look, right? But,
There's one line of, is it Diane placing someone in a hug? Placing, and it's kind of a, you don't remember it. Okay, I have to find it, but you know, stocking legs terminating in a pair of Birkenstock clogs. Like it's always, you're looking for that best verb. That's great.
well, there's that one that I forgot that we're in this piece that I read when she's at the Twin Peaks bar, if you know it, in San Francisco, and where she says that the guy bumbles over on his couch. You know? And did I write that?
Well,
Warren, you had a question.
I didn't really know a lot about what this book was about because I just known you as a friend. So when I read this book the first time and I finished it, I love books about trauma. I love them because, you know, if you experience trauma as your character did in chapter 1, after I read that, I called you and said, this was a really difficult
Right.
story to read for me. And as a gay man growing up, did I just out myself?
No.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
And then I thought of it in terms of a movie, of course, I always do because I love them. And you asked me, well, who would play Kyle? And I said, Meryl. Can play anything. But you know, I was talking to your friend Kathy before, you know your friend Kathy, I'm sure it was Kathy tonight, and I said, you know, I just watched the film, a documentary on Jane Fonda. I love her. And it was Jane Fonda in 5 acts. And I thought, I wouldn't care how this was done if it was done in five acts. I think it's a really important book. And if I were writing a review of your book, Lucian, and you're my friend and I love you so much for doing this book and sharing it with the world, I could not write anything that the reviewers have not written and put in your book already.
Well,
If
thank
you
you.
just open it, read what's on the front page and read what's on the back page, those are writers who are in such awe of this really, I think it's a really important work and I commend you so much.
Thank you so much. And let me ask you guys, because a lot of people read it, did people find that sort of, you know, that, you know, 6 separate stories with long periods of time in between? Were you able to navigate that, piece it together? And Louise?
I wanted you to just keep on going. You're not done yet with these characters, really, because the use of time and the passage of time has such a key role in the
Right.
evolution and
Right.
as you discover the character over time.
Right.
I feel like I still don't grasp Kyle, and I'm
Right.
curious how anchored he is as a character in your mind as you're writing this, because he's that thread all the way through, but I felt like I'm still grasping to know him because it was from everybody else's perspective.
Yeah, I mean, I think that form doesn't let you really grab a hold of him really.
No,
Very
and that's
well.
what's, you know, that's what leaves me wanting more.
Right.
But for you, as you were writing it, was he really well defined as a person in your mind as you were going
Well,
through
you know, he is,
the passage of time?
he is in a lot of ways based on me. You know, I mean,
Mhm.
I've experienced trauma in my life. It's marked me, you know, and so that's, I mean, writing isn't really therapy, but, you know, because we're not really writing about ourselves directly, but it, you know, we are using our stuff, you know, to, you know, we are exercising our demons when we write it. And so, I mean, he is as formed as I am, I guess, you know. Does that answer your
Yeah,
question?
that's, yeah.
Yes, Grant.
Visual artists are often asked, painters
Oh,
in
Tom.
particular, how do you know when the painting's finished? And that's my question to you. How do you know when you've said enough?
Lee?
I mean, what is this saw, right? No piece of writing is ever finished, it's only abandoned. And that could not be more true. You know, you can work it and work it. Maybe you have a different answer.
No, I like that answer. Somebody says they know they've come to the end when they put the comma in and they've taken the comma out like 5 or 6 times, and they just, you know, they're just you basically, I think you just can't go any further, you know. And then, because if you do, it probably is true with painting too, you're going to start ruining it. You're going to start ruining it.
In other words, when you start fussing, it's time to stop.
Yeah, and it's hard to know what's fussing and hard to know what's just trying to go deeper, you know. It's kind of hard to know, but I think eventually you get to the point where, you know, and so I turned it in, and then it took them like forever to actually get to the copy editing. I said, can I take another look at it? And so I worked on it some more a little bit, and then after it went to typesetting, I said, can I make some? So now it's stuck. I can't wedge in a chapter about the father.
Did you say earlier that there are going to be sequels? Or
Yeah, there's 3 linked novellas. So the next one is also it's going to be 6. It's also 6 stories. I submitted 2 groups of 6 linked short stories to Biblioasis, and they decided to only publish this one first. And so that'll be one. And then there's another one that features the grandfather and Elaine. And then when Rachel goes to Texas to take care of the grandfather, she's in that one too. So there's, if it ever gets finished, there's 3 linked novellas.
Well, that would satisfy your sense that you just wanted them to keep going. Pre-ordered, right? So there were a couple of things that Lucian's up to. At 7 Minutes in Book Heaven, a podcast.
It's a podcast.
Yeah, so coming June 6th.
You know, it's going to drop June 6th, and you can find a link on my website, www.lucianchilds.com.
Okay, and then you did an interview with CIUT Radio.
I'm going to do an interview, and I'm not sure when it'll drop, but just you can go to my website and stuff. There'll be other things happening. I don't know if there'll be more things happening here, but stay tuned to the website, or I'll let you know. I'll talk to you through the fence.
Well, I just want to thank you so much for opening yourself up so honestly and making yourself vulnerable and talking about this work and in all of its, you know, like the journey that you took to get to this place. And thank you so much.
And I want to thank you guys. I mean, it's really amazing to see all my friends here. And just thank you so much.
And this beautiful bookstore. I just want to.
Oh, yes.
Where is Jackson? Okay, so you know, we're all of us in this room are readers. Some of us are also writers. Like we want to get down on, you know, our knees to thank the bookstores for fighting the good fight, so that we can come in and actually pick up a physical book, and you for working in this place and you know can actually touch it and you know. This is good work that you do. So thank you.
Queen Books is very active. They have lots of readings at lots of community events. We're down at Word on the Street last weekend selling books. So you'll see Queen Books all over town. So I think we should give them a hand.
wine, there's little cheese and fruit left, please, enjoy yourself, and, I believe there's a gathering afterwards, Lucian, you wanna,
Yeah, I think I've told everybody about it, so, yeah,
all right.
we'll head down there when we finish up.
And if we want to buy books,
Jackson will.
Jax will take it and he'll sign.
Oh,